Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for our 11th annual Animal Law Symposium. My name is Miranda Groh, and I'm this year's symposium editor for Animal Law Review. I am so looking forward to an inspiring day filled with outstanding conversations on all things animal law. First, we would like to begin by acknowledging that our academic institution in the so-called Portland metro area rests on stolen traditional and ancestral indigenous homelands of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, and many other tribes of the Columbia River. Land acknowledgements are an imperfect process, but they are a reminder of our duty to recognize and support indigenous knowledge, creativity, and resilience, including fighting for reparations and the land back movement. Centering our work for non-human animal advocacy in this greater context of social injustice is a vital component of ensuring that our movement is in solidarity with broader social justice movements overall. Just a couple of administrative notes as we move through the event. Just know that all attendees' cameras and sound will be off throughout the event. The chat function is also turned off. However, you may use the Q&A function down below to submit any questions, and we will answer those at the end of each event as we go through the day. So now it is my distinct honor to introduce Dean Jennifer Johnson. She is the Dean of our law school here at Lewis and Clark, and we are so lucky to have her and the school's support behind us. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dean Johnson.
Thank you, Miranda. I think I've got this unmuted properly. As Miranda said, I'm the Dean of our law school, and it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to Lewis and Clark and the Animal Law Symposium. From its beginnings, our Animal Law Review was a student publication. And over 25 years ago, and I was here on our faculty, our students came to us with this novel idea of publishing a law journal devoted solely to animal rights. And remember back then, most of us had never heard of a field of legal study devoted to animals, although many of us owned and loved animals, and a few of us, like me, even illegally brought them to work. The idea of a separate animal law field, nonetheless a new journal in animal law, seemed illogical, and we as a faculty did not get it. But fortunately, our students did. And over the years, we've had extraordinary students creating and editing important pieces of scholarship that have influenced animal protection advocacy and policy, both in the United States and abroad. I am so proud of this journal and our students and all they've accomplished, and I look forward to see what innovative and important work the journal does in the future. I want to congratulate the editors-in-chief this year, Ron Hyatt and Cindy Lunt, and of course our symposium editor, Miranda Groh, and the rest of the staff on the Animal Law Review. And I also want to thank the Animal Legal Defense Fund that supported this journal since its beginnings and supports this event today. We have a great group of speakers on the agenda. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Miranda.
Thank you so much, Dean Johnson. Now it is my privilege to introduce our first speaker of the day, who will enter in with some welcome remarks, Professor Joyce Tischler. We are very lucky to have Professor Tischler here at Lewis and Clark Law School. She joined as a professor of practice in May 2019 and previously served as adjunct faculty professor at Lewis and Clark since 2011. She also taught as adjunct faculty at University of California, Davis, John Marshall Law School, and John F. Kennedy Law School, and has lectured at law schools throughout the US. Professor Tischler is affectionately referred to as the mother of animal law. She has been a trailblazer in the field of animal law for more than 40 years and has dedicated her career to improving the lives of animals through the legal system. She is internationally recognized for her work and speaks across the globe on issues germane to animal protection. Professor Tischler founded the Animal Legal Defense Fund in 1979, the first nonprofit dedicated to protecting animals through the law. Professor Tischler worked as ALDF's executive director for 25 years and as general counsel until her retirement in spring 2019. There, she conceived of and litigated cutting-edge cases aimed at protecting the interests of animals. Professor Tischler paved the way through a legal system that routinely ignored the interests of animals. Professor Tischler's deep experience and shaping of the field of animal law is detailed in her two-part article, A Brief History of Animal Law, Part 1 and Part 2, published in the Stanford Journal of Animal Law and Policy. Professor Tischler is currently co-authoring a casebook on industrial animal agriculture law and policy. The book, a first of its kind, will provide a comprehensive overview of concentrated animal feed operations and the animal welfare, environmental, worker justice, and other social justice issues impacted by industrialized animal agriculture in the United States and beyond. So everyone, please join me in welcoming to the stage Professor Joyce Tischler.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen right from the start. Hang on a sec. And there we go. Okay, good morning. One of the things I'm enjoying, excuse me, about getting older is that a lot of the chatter that was in my brain has fallen away. You know, the chatter. The doubts, the worries, the second guessing that defined my younger years. Moving past the chatter has freed me up to focus on what I think is really important. I don't mean to sound like I'm boasting, but I think I've lived the life I was supposed to live, and I've done the work I was supposed to do, and I'm still doing that work. And no, I didn't listen to my parents. I didn't get a job with a large prestigious law firm. I never married a doctor. I didn't get rich or famous. And truth be told, I never made it past 5 feet in height. But I feel really lucky. I followed this little voice inside my head that told me to use my law degree to work for non-human animals. I know a lot of lawyers who earn a good living, are in prestigious positions, but it's just a job to them. They don't really care about their work the way I care about mine. I'm passionate about the work I do, and I've been able to spend over 40 years putting my beliefs and values into action. So I thought, excuse me, a little early for me. I thought I'd give you a preview of what you're going to do and who you're going to do it for and why you're going to do it. If you're already learning about the problems of animals, that the animals experience, you're well on your way. And you're gaining, unfortunately, what the author Carol Adams calls traumatic knowledge. Knowledge about how bad it is for them. Knowledge that darkens your soul. So what I'm going to do in this few minutes we have together is to show you pictures of beautiful, healthy animals, the way they're supposed to be. So I want you to enjoy the slides and understand that these are your de facto clients. As you look at these beautiful animals, I want to share a concept with you. It's called Tikkun Olam, which means the world is broken and it's our job to repair it. I mend the world by working for non-human animals. I speak for them because they cannot speak for themselves. This concept encourages us to stretch our hearts and embrace more of this world, to stand beside the wounded and the defenseless, to embrace those who suffer, to acknowledge and reach out to those who are ignored, exploited, and abused. And this is not just a religious or a feel-good or a political agenda. It's the central meaning of our lives. The world and all of its inhabitants need more generosity, more mercy, and better care. Discovering how to mend the world is a profoundly important task. When I stand in solidarity with all life, my experience of living changes. I'm no longer concerned with only taking care of me and mine. That's a myopic view of life. Tikkun Olam means recognizing that the well-being of those with whom I share this planet, all beings, is also my own. When I look into the eyes of other animals, I see my own. Whatever situation may come before me, I will try to do no harm, but more importantly, I will work to relieve suffering and to offer care, respect, and protection. This is the ethical basis for all social movements, you know. So how does this relate to you? You who are studying law and working to protect animals? Well, that's pretty easy to figure out. We know this world is unjust. It's an unfair place for non-human animals. This world causes them pain and uses them as if their needs and their interests don't matter. Most human beings seem to believe that humanity is far superior to all other species. The ultimate evolution of life on this planet, that's us. Now, I'm fond of human beings, I really am, but we know that humans are not alone in their ability to feel pain and have a sense of their own life. We know that dogs and cats and cows and pigs and chimpanzees, in fact, all of the more complex beings have a central nervous system that is much like our own. They suffer. They feel both physical and emotional pain. They feel joy and pleasure, and they form close familial relationships with members of their own species. And when members of their family die, they grieve. They show that they have emotions and preferences, they communicate their needs, and sometimes they even show a sense of humor. We've been raised in a society that has a rather schizophrenic relationship with animals. We love dogs and cats. We spend billions of dollars on pet food and toys and beddings and veterinary care. And yet too often, too many humans abuse, harm, and exploit even those family members. But a much greater long-term suffering happens in commercial or institutional settings, research labs, puppy mills, circuses, rodeos, and even zoos. My focus for the past decade has been on industrial animal agriculture, what some people call factory farms, but I don't like to use the word farm because this industry has nothing to do with farming. Each year, billions of animals are raised for food, not these two. That's Deja and that's River. Most of those animals are forced to live in intensive confinement. They can barely move or turn around. They can't socialize with others of their own kind as they normally would. They can't do anything that is natural to them, in fact. Broiler chickens have been bred to grow so fast that their skeletons can't support their growth. Their legs break. Dairy cows have been bred to produce so much milk, far more milk than their bodies can tolerate, and they break down. They live out their lives in a persistent state of suffering, physical pain, frustration because their most basic needs are being ignored. They're treated as if they're machines. The problem is they're not machines, they're living beings. Many of them die before they even reach the slaughterhouse because their deaths are simply a cost of doing business to the industry. And all of this suffering happens because most people consider these sentient beings as lives that don't really matter except when they're food or fur or shoes. Otherwise, they're not important enough for us to be informed, much less concerned about their pain. But their suffering does matter. It's important to the individual who experiences it, whether that individual is an elephant, a bird, an octopus, a cow. In the spirit of Tikkun Olam, that suffering is important to you and me. The world is broken, and it's our job to repair it. Suffering matters. We don't look away. You get that. I don't have to explain that to you. It's like we've got some eerie sixth sense, the ability to hear and see the suffering of non-human beings. And we want to take action to bring that suffering to a halt, to allow those beings to live their lives in peace and dignity, surrounded by their kin, like the animals in these pictures. And I know how it feels to finally meet humans who think the way we do. Many of the people closest to us will never be able to hear or see what we do. But what has changed in my lifetime is that now those people respect the fact that we can hear and see those voices. They may not be willing to take our path, but on some level, they understand that we're serving a higher purpose. Harriet Beecher Stowe once wrote, "It's the matter of taking the side of the weak against the strong, something the best people have always done." Somebody has to stand up for the animals. Somebody has to speak for them and fight for what is right, because they matter. Their pain matters. Their interests matter. I've learned that my place in this world is to help human beings open their hearts and their minds to the widespread suffering that is inflicted upon animals. My task is to help them support an end to that suffering. My career and the work that we do at the Center for Animal Law Studies and in the animal law movement is a reflection of our understanding of Tikkun Olam, our duty to mend the world. We use our legal skills to protect animals precisely because most people choose to ignore their suffering. And we know that as much as we could correct, we know that as much as we wish we could correct all the wrongs quickly, the reality is that we have a long road ahead of us and much hard work to do. So many animals are abused, exploited, terrorized, and in pain. I caution each of us to ask ourselves some questions on a regular basis. One is, how can I get animals out of a persistent state of suffering? How can I help to build a body of law that provides increased protections for animals, that recognizes that they have interests, and that forces our society to consider those interests and balance them against the interests of human beings? And how can I help the legal effort to create rights for animals? Well, that's no small task, as we all know. Building the animal law movement won't just happen. We have to strategically build a movement that is strong and solid and successful so that we can create meaningful change for the animals within the legal system. We must make inroads into a pervasive system that denies even the animals' most basic needs. We can't be bystanders. We have to start somewhere. And this is probably going to sound weird, but it doesn't really matter where you start. Pick an issue, pick a species, pick whatever you are passionate about, roll up your sleeves and take action. I may seem confident to you now, but believe me, I was not born knowing that someday I'd be called the mother of animal law. I spent my early 20s confused and miserable. And if I had known how hard it was going to be to start a movement, I might not have tried. I didn't get hired to be the first executive director of ALDF because I beat out a large group of qualified applicants. There were no other applicants. No one wanted my job. It wasn't because there was a bad economy or a good economy. There was no economy. No one wanted that prestigious job because I had to raise the money to pay my own salary. No one else was willing to do that. We got a grant from the Animal Protection Institute, and that gave us $6,000. We had no office, no equipment, no support, no clear idea of where and how to raise money to pay my salary and to do our work. I say that not to point out how brave I am, because I'm really not very brave. I'm really quite ordinary. I say it because the externalities didn't matter. We found a way to do what we had to do because we had to. The animals needed lawyers. Tikkun Olam, okay? No turning back, no giving up. Failure, not an option. I've learned that we mold ourselves by facing difficult choices, by dealing with adversity. All of those seemingly scary choices that we are forced to make are necessary. They help us to learn who we are and how far we can go. So I hope the takeaway from this talk is don't focus on the economy, don't focus on the pandemic, don't focus on whether there are enough jobs for animal lawyers, don't focus on your nagging sense of inadequacy, focus on the animals, focus on Tikkun Olam. You are doing important work right now. You are building your capacity to serve animals and mend the world. The classes you're taking are teaching you what you need to know. You're exploring the resources that are available to you. The first generation of animal lawyers has given you a very sound foundation. There are books being published. You have law journals that will help you develop your ideas, and you can use your input in any of those. Clerkships, fellowships, where you can hone your legal skills. You have student support groups. You have Kelly Lavenda and Priscilla Rader of ALDF and the other staff there, the Center for Animal Law Studies. Even if you don't go, all of these are resources that you can use. And this symposium, this is for you. Savor it. Keep attending webinars and symposia, animal law conferences, and get out of your comfort zone and network with everyone you can, whether it's online, by phone, or in person, because that's going to re-energize you and it's going to give you more tools for your toolbox. And don't be afraid to reach out to those of us who have been living this life for 10, 20, 30, in my case, 43 years. Each of us found a way to do the work somehow. And we didn't know what our paths would be or what our careers would look like until they started to take shape. Pick our brains, take advantage of what we've learned. Use it to make yourself the best possible advocate for the animals. And one thing more that I'd like to mention, because you may not have considered this yet, understand that the work you do to protect animals is going to transform you. It's going to make you into the person you were meant to be. I'm not puffing. That's not something I made up to make you feel better. It's something I've learned because I've witnessed it happen to so many of my colleagues and myself. This work will mold you into the person you were meant to be. Who's that person? No, I don't know. I don't have the answer for that. You're gonna figure that out. I hope that you will hang on to hope, right? Keep it safely tucked in your pocket to remind you that there's going to be a better day for the animals and that you're going to be part of the reason for that progress. There's a well-known saying from an ancient rabbi, Rabbi Hillel, and that's, if I'm not for myself, then who is for me? If I'm only for myself, then what am I? And if not, when? If not now, when? I'd like to paraphrase that. If I'm not here for the animals, then who will be here for them? And if not now, then when? I want to thank the planners of the symposium for asking me to talk. I want to thank you for being here, for showing up for the animals. Listen, if you weren't studying animal law, Steve Wise and David Faber and I would be sitting in a corner somewhere with our heads in our hands, and we'd be asking ourselves, what happened? It was a good idea. Why didn't anybody follow? Why didn't it catch on? But more importantly, who's going to be here for the animals after we're gone? We don't have to feel that way because the future of animal law is bright. It's here right now. You are it. You are our future. You're going to continue the work we started. You carry the spirit of Tikkun Olam. You have opened your eyes to see the needs of the animals. You've opened your ears. You've heard their cries. You've opened your hearts to their pain. You are learning where help is needed and how to provide it. And you're allowing yourself to be of use to mend the world. So let's make a pact, okay? Against all odds, we are going to change the world and make it a far better place for the animals. Namaste to you all, and thank you for listening. And now, on to your first panel.
Thank you so much, Professor Tischler, for those inspiring opening remarks. Always great to have you, rev us up and get us all excited about these things. And we're so blessed to have you on our team. So just a couple other things before we get started with our first panel for the day. Our first panel is Coexistence with Wildlife in the Pacific Northwest. Our second event is Advancing Equity in Animal Advocacy. Then we'll take a lunch break, and then we'll come back for animal ethics, animal law, and social justice with Dr. Gruen. We'll have a panel this afternoon at 1:30 on the fight for a sustainable food system. And we will close out the day with a discussion of how far we've come by Jim Mason, another one of the movement's early founders. So stay tuned for all of this. And all of this is, of course, to round out our theme, progress and perseverance in animal law. Where our goal today is to highlight some of the accomplishments that we've made in various fields of animal law and the fields that intersect with animal law as well, while also acknowledging our ongoing work and talking about how we can continue our fight. So once again, thank you so much. We look forward to the rest of the day, and thank you for being here. Cheers.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Miranda, for setting everything up. Hello, everybody. My name is Rianka McQuan. I am a 1L here at Lewis and Clark Law School. I am super interested in wildlife and environmental law. I was actually a zookeeper for several years. So I'm just super thrilled to hear all three of our speakers' presentations. Seeing the panelists, I was super excited to see the diversity of ethnic, academic, legal backgrounds and interests. and we're having 3 different speakers here today. I just want to let you know that we'll be getting started at 9:30. So in a couple minutes. You should have seen in the chat that there was a link drop to the CLE credit. I'm not sure if anybody already had the time to look at that document that was placed, the Excel spreadsheet. There's 2 different emails you can reach out to. One was already placed for the Animal Law Symposium, and I'm about to drop in the chat. Let's see, I have Miranda's email as well. And if anybody's having any issues with sound or with any part of the presentations, feel free to reach out to the IT department as well. At the end of the presentation, this is for everybody throughout the day, we're going to be having Q&As at the end. So right now we'll be having 3 different speakers. Feel free to send any of those questions in the chat to me, and I'll be able to reach out to the panelists at the end so we can kind of have that moderated. And then just all day, as you have those questions, just have them sent in as it is the webinar format. Yeah, so in general, we have all these different speakers here to talk about our larger theme of the day. And it's really awesome that they were all able to show up on a not super bright, but a really nice Friday morning. So thank you to everybody that's been here. The first panel we'll be having will be about wildlife. And like I said, my background is in wildlife, so I'm really excited to hear them speak. And as you'll kind of notice, their backgrounds are pretty varied, and I know some of them do work together. So that's really awesome that they're here to collaborate, not just, in their legal fields and at work, but with us as students and as faculty members, etc. It still looks like we have a pretty good turnout, which is really nice. I know I saw some 1Ls in here, 2Ls, some other hosts. So thank you everybody for showing up. I know it's 1Ls, we don't have class on Friday morning. So thank you so much for actually showing up to something outside of the classroom. So yeah, with that, we're gonna get started in just about a minute or so. I believe I see all the panelists for our first event here. So there's 3 of them, and our first one will be Tiana Williams-Claussen, and then we'll be moving on to Dr. Srishti Kamal and Bob Sallinger. Like I said, if you have questions for them, either as a collective or individually, feel free to send those in the chat, and I'll make sure that they see them. We are trying to stick to a pretty minute by minute schedule. So if I can't get to some of your questions, not a problem. I know that some of them have provided their emails. Just so we want to be aware of our whole day and making sure everything's running smoothly. Miranda put a lot of effort into it, so just want to be really conscientious of that. So with that, I want to introduce our first speaker of the day, and her name is Tiana Williams-Claussen. She's with the Yurok Tribe Wildlife Program. She's a Yurok tribal member from the village of Welque. And I know I totally butchered that pronunciation. I'll let her correct that. She was raised in the Yurok ancestral territory. She received her Bachelor of Arts degree in Biochemical Sciences from Harvard University, after which she returned to serve her tribe. And she was instrumental to the formation of the Yurok Tribe Wildlife Department in 2008. And she currently serves as department director. Her native upbringing and formal education allow her to really bridge the gap between the traditional understanding of our world and those rooted in Western science, and supporting her in her work towards a cohesive, well-informed approach to holistic ecosystem management. And with that, Tiana, I'm super excited to hear you speak. If all your presentation stuff's ready to go, whenever you're ready, feel free to take it from here.
Perfect, and thank you so much for that introduction. Yes, I think Welque is probably one of the hardest Yurok words to say. That's my traditional village, and actually behind me in the Zoom that you can see. So let me go ahead and pull up my presentation. Let's see here. The share function should work. Okay. There we go. So I'm very honored to have been invited here today to talk about a project very near and dear to my heart, which is the Northern California Condor Restoration Program. It is bringing California condor, Preganish in the Yurok language, back to Yurok ancestral territory, a home which they haven't seen for over 130 years now. Now, this being a law-oriented sort of discussion, I'm going to focus today on the complexities within intergovernmental coordination to make this happen. Because while there's plenty of biological and ecological complexities that go along with condor conservation, sometimes working with people, even when you want to work with them and together, can be the most difficult part in this sort of work. But in case anybody's not familiar, a California condor is a super cool bird. They're actually the largest land-based bird in North America, with a wingspan of 9 to 9.5 feet and weighing as much as 25 pounds. We say that their lifespan is unknown because they're so long-lived. We do have at least one individual who's 55 years old, and their near cousin, the Andean condor, can live as much as 80 years. So they take a long life approach, but slow reproduction approach of only just one chick every 2 years, which prehistorically has worked very well for them, but with pressures from mankind has really caused them to go into a dangerous decline with high mortality rates and low reproduction rates. So they're on the endangered species list. We're actually one of the first to be put on the endangered species list and remain there today. It in fact got so bad that their population, which used to spread over most of North America, or a good chunk of it, was largely reduced to a small wishbone shape in Central and Southern California, and only 22 individuals left in the entire world. At that point, with the very dire and precipitous drop in population, they made a very controversial decision to capture all individuals in the hopes of starting a captive rearing program, growing the population and reintroducing them to the wild in hopefully a more controlled and manageable fashion. And in fact, it was very successful, such that by the 1990s, they were reintroducing birds into the wild, primarily focusing originally in that kind of Central and Southern California range that they had last been observed in. But so the Yurok tribe would like to expand on the great conservation work that has been done so far. This is our traditional territory. We're just south of the Oregon border. This kind of red larger blob here is our ancestral territory. And that red line around what's the Klamath River, 1 mile on either side, is actually our reservation, which is our jurisdictional authority, you might say, where we can enact tribal law. It's only about 10% of our traditional territory, but we maintain our moral, ethical obligation to the full of ancestral territory to bring it into restoration and balance. But if you look at the little inset map in the corner, the little yellow dots are where the existing sites are in California, and the purple dot is the northward jump that we'd like to bring condors home to. It's about in the middle of their prehistorical range, which used to go all the way up to British Columbia. And so the reason that we're invested in this is because of their cultural importance to the Yurok tribe and all the surrounding tribes, which relates to our foundational reason for being, what we consider to be our reason for being, which is as world renewal or fix the earth people. And so our relationship with Condor, who as a scavenger, which is his ecological role, is kind of the ultimate in world renewal of people. And it goes all the way back to the beginning of time and really ties to one way in which we try to bring restoration and balance to the world, which is through our high ceremonies, our world renewal ceremonies, the jump dance and the deerskin dance, for which we believe that he gave us a song which carries his spirit, for which he provides his feathers for regalia, again, carrying that spirit of renewal and also a spirit of kind-heartedness to the dance. And we believe as well that he carries our prayers to the heavens when we're asking for the world to be in balance. And he hasn't been here for 130 years, which has really strained our capacity to remain in relationship with him and to fully implement our world renewal practices. So this world renewal ethic is deeply embedded in kind of the first step in my discussion of tribal law, which is our Yurok constitution. And our Yurok constitution is based on our role as world renewal people. And there's 2 particular points in the Yurok constitution that relate to Condor. The first being to preserve and promote our culture, language, and religious beliefs and practices and pass them on to our children in perpetuity, and to restore and enhance the tribal fishery, water rights, forests, and all other natural resources, including our wildlife community members. Now, the Yurok constitution is not only in the Yurok reservation, but because we never ceded our traditional role as caretakers of all of ancestral lands, actually designates the whole of that ancestral territory and says our obligation is to the whole of that ancestral territory. But this is problematic because while we say so, not everybody necessarily agrees, and most of our lands are in other people's management, mostly federal in this area, but a lot of private landowners as well, particularly timber companies and other industrial sorts. So co-management is something really important to meeting tribal, natural, and cultural resource restoration objectives. And this particular project is being done in coordination with Redwood National Park. They're that green boundary there. There's a lot of overlap between their management boundaries and both our reservation and our ancestral territory. So we're looking to release them in an area that kind of meets both of our jurisdictional authority needs. So right there, that little oval there is where we're looking to release the birds, actually on Redwood National Park lands. Now we have a really strong partnership with the Redwood National Park, the National Park Service, and that's proven fruitful in a lot of ways, but from a legal perspective, definitely, because they truly feel that we are equal partners, actually even potentially stronger partners, because we've been driving this from the very beginning. They see this as a very Yurok endeavor, which is a unique sort of perspective because not all federal agencies or governments recognize the tribal sovereignty or the traditional authority or the power to get things done that tribes really have. But so our very strong partnership actually resulted in something that's pretty unique. So as part of releasing the birds, both as a species protected under the Endangered Species Act and by releasing them into an area that's federally protected, we of course had to go through the National Environmental Protection Act program process of doing an environmental assessment. And for that environmental assessment, the Yurok tribe was actually one of the co-leads on the EA. And so a co-lead on an environmental assessment is usually the federal entity that's most in charge of it. So in this case, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, because it's an endangered species, and the National Park Service, because it's on their lands. So basically the one whose authority it's under, and also whoever's initiating the action. So in this case, the service and the Park Service are both very obvious, but because we are strong partners and they recognized what's called the Yurok environmental policy, which also requires an environmental assessment for this sort of project under tribal law, they said, hey, you've got just as much authority to be a part of this as we do, so you need to be a co-lead, which is something that we fully agreed with. Typically, tribes are not invested in this at this level, instead having to engage on the consultation level. So consultation is basically when the federal government comes to a tribe saying, we want to do this thing, what's your opinion? We give their opinion, good or bad, and then, but they're not under any sort of obligation to actually do anything according to what we say. We're just telling them what we think. This made us equal partners in the ultimate decision to bring condors home. And if this is not the first time it's ever happened, it's extremely rare. And I don't personally know of other examples of this. I'd love to learn about more. So it's very rare that this has ever happened. It was a particularly complicated process because not only did it involve the environmental assessment, but the preferred action, which was designating the species as under the 10J Act, Section 10J of the Endangered Species Act, which designates them as a non-essential experimental population. And so that arose out of, honestly, what's been a 14-year process now. We started this in 2008, where we really right off the bat started engaging not only with our federal partners, but our state partners and our industry partners and land managers in the area saying, hey, we're proposing to bring this endangered species back to our area, but that, we want to know how you think that's going to impact your operations for restoration or for economics or whatever it might be, because we want to make this something that works for everybody. And so we actually ended up signing an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, with 16 partners, federal, tribal, state, industry, utility, nonprofit, saying that not only was it good for condors to bring them back to the North Coast, but it would be good for the North Coast to bring them back. But this partnership building allowed us to craft 10J 4D rules, they're called, which specifically prioritize condor conservation as the highest priority, but relax those ESA regulations that might not necessarily benefit condors, which are very adaptable, but which would negatively impact our region. And so we ran these two things kind of back or in the same process. The 10J is specifically a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service process, but between the two, they got literally thousands of comments, and what's normally a 2-year process ended up being something more like a 6-year process for us. But ultimately, as of March of last year, we got both our FONSI, which is the finding of no significant impact, and a federal rule designating this as a 10J population, which was the preferred alternative. Now that added another layer of complexity in that while the Federal Endangered Species Act has this flexibility, the California Endangered Species Act does not, and Condor is also listed under the California Endangered Species Act. So we had to actually develop a new law in California specific to this process that said California had the authority to make a consistency determination, and California would manage condors at the same level as the 10J designation indicated. So we had to pass California law to make that possible. And then it actually took 2 years for the state to go through their review process, because the law allowed for the possibility, but did not make the consistency determination. So the state then had to go through their review process to make that determination. And that just came to fruition last December. But hand in hand with this, this has been a major partnership endeavor. We always say it takes a village to raise a condor. Hundreds of people have contributed to this. The first way in that partnership MOU that I messaged, but we've also been working with the parks to develop a facility management agreement to share park assets. I share this picture because this is the asset they're sharing with us. It was actually a building they had planned to demolish. This is how we've had it on the left. We found some funding to renovate it, and it's looking really gorgeous now. And that's going to be our main office base of operations from which we do our field operations jump off point, basically. We're also working on a general agreement between the parks and the tribe that will specifically delineate who's going to do what when it comes to condor restoration. We've got a veterinary agreement in the works with a whole host of people within the broader California condor recovery effort, so that we can get condors treatment that they need as they need it, because every bird is incredibly important. And particularly interesting to me, we're working on an MOU with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife regarding information and data sharing. And so this comes up as another way that tribal and federal law can kind of butt up against each other, because we really want to protect the data that we're going to produce about condors to protect them. So make sure that their nesting areas don't get out, make sure that their well-known roost areas don't get out, both to protect them from people who really love them, but shouldn't be interacting as closely as they'd like to, and also from people who don't love them. It's pretty typical that the other release sites get FOIA'd or Federal Freedom of Information Act to get condor data. And they say, we're not telling you to go herd a condor, but here's the information about where the condors are on sites that are anti-condor. So we've done this through 2 ways, or are seeking to do this through 2 ways: protect them through a resolution which designates the Klamath River as a cultural riverscape and all the species endemic to it a critical part of it, so need to be protected, and also designating California condor itself as both a cultural resource and historic property, which offers it protection under the Yurok Cultural Resource Protection Act, the National Historic Protection Act, the National Environmental Protection Act, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, and the California Environmental Quality Act. So California really wants to play ball with this, but the feds are actually really being the sticking point, and we continue to work towards that. I've just got a minute and a half left, so I'm going to really race through the fun stuff of what we're doing. We have been working hard since last March, which was kind of our federal okay to move forward, building one of these guys, which is a release and management facility. This is the one at Pinnacles National Park, but it's a good snapshot of it. It's got a flight pen where the birds will be held while in our management until we release them, and an observation room where we can do any capture and handling to make sure that the birds are well and healthy. We are about 95% done, which is super exciting, and looking at receiving birds by the end of March. These are our 4 birds. They're currently staged at the Ventana Wildlife Society, 1 female and 3 males. They'll be moved up, like I said, at the end of March. Our, I guess you'd call management strategy, is to actually release about 6 birds per year, which will receive at 2 years of age, which is both juvenile but fully flight capable from the captive rearing programs. They'll be allowed to acclimate to our area for a few months, and then will be released in a staged approach that we can really make sure that each bird is healthy and well. Every bird will be outfitted with a single satellite and a radio transmitter, which will allow us to do home range, risk and benefit analyses, allow with landowners who may have some of these risks or benefits to help bring them in as partners. And we'll all have a mortality signal so that if the bird doesn't move for too long, we know that we can go in. We have to go in and figure out what's going on with them. We're going to conduct biannual trap-ups, both in the spring and the fall, to do a physical check of the bird and blood draws to check for contaminants of concern and disease, do any sort of transmitter and tag maintenance. This is us training with other facilities to do these sort of trap-ups, which has been a super lot of fun. And ultimately, our goal is not just restoration to the Yurok tribe, but restoration to the Pacific Northwest. I'm hoping that lower populations will reduce human and condor conflict, and that we'll have been able to release 120 birds over the next 20 years. And ultimately, the goal is, of course, to have birds without tags. I'm very happy to be doing this on behalf of my daughter and all the Yurok children who will now grow up with condor in their skies, as I did not. And with that, I'll say wak thou. Thank you very much. And if you want more information, I'll be here for the questions. And here's some websites where you can find some more information. I'll post them in the chat as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. So interesting to hear about, see those pictures, just kind of hear your personal experience. And everybody, like, please send me some questions for her. It's not every day that we get to speak to somebody that has personal invested experience. So I can definitely tell that your passion kind of shows throughout your work. So thank you so much again, Tiana. It's really awesome to hear you speak. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to our next presenter, who I do see her here, and that's going to be Dr. Srishti Kamal. She's with the Defenders of Wildlife. Awesome. Thank you so much, Doctor. Dr. Kamal is the senior representative for Defenders of Wildlife, and she's based out of Portland, Oregon, so right here with us. In her role, Dr. Kamal works in close collaboration with our local partners, state agencies, and the legislature for securing better policies for wildlife in Oregon. Her portfolio includes imperiled species such as the gray wolf, marled murrelet, and southern resident orcas, as well as supporting ecological connectivity work, anti-poaching efforts, and agency commission reform. Dr. Kamal has a PhD in ecology, and her academic background focused on the human dimensions of wildlife conservation. She's originally from India and grew up in a biodiversity hotspot with elephants, tigers, and rhinos, which really sparked her passion for wildlife. And through her education and her professional career, Dr. Kamal has worked in different regions of the world, including India, Poland, Haiti, Ethiopia, Timor-Leste, and of course, the United States. It's awesome to hear your connection with legislature and beyond. Thank you so much, Dr. Kamal. Whenever you're ready, you can take it from here.
Thank you so much, Rianka. And good morning, everyone. Really nice to meet you all. My name is Srishti Kamal, and I'm the senior representative with Defenders of Wildlife. As Rianka mentioned, I am not a lawyer, but my work does intersect a lot with policy development in Oregon, and so that's what I'll focus on. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. If it does not show up, please do let me know. My part of the panel discussion today will focus on promoting coexistence with carnivores, because that's a large part of our work here. And I'll be talking about wolves because I'll use that species as an example, but that really applies to all carnivores that we have in Oregon. So, but let's start with how wildlife policies are developed in Oregon to begin with. Broadly speaking, we have three different branches of decision-making bodies. One is, of course, the legislature. Then we have the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission that oversees Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. And then, of course, tribal governments maintaining sovereignty over their lands and resources. Now, in Oregon, we have a really archaic system of classifying animals, or specifically carnivores. We separately classify some animals as predators, and predators in Oregon are managed by the legislature, not by ODF&W. The definition of predator is more driven by agriculture than by science. So, for example, beavers are classified as predators in Oregon. Wolves, on the other hand, are classified as special status game, and as such, they're managed by Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and their commission. So let's look at a quick stats on Oregon's wolves. As you can see, we don't have the 2021 count for wolves because we are due for that next month. But as of 2020, we had at least 173 wolves in the state, and they were in 22 packs and some groups. A pack in Oregon is defined as 4 or more wolves traveling together during the winter. it's winter because that's when ODF&W does their annual surveys. In terms of protections, legal protections, it's a little bit wonky in Oregon. Our eastern 1/3 of the state was federally delisted back in 2011, along with Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and parts of Utah, as part of a distinct population segment called the Northern Rockies population. But our western 2/3 had federal ESA or Endangered Species Act protection all the way till 2020, when under Trump administration, the US Fish and Wildlife Service delisted wolves from all lower 48 states of the country, which led to a lawsuit by several conservation groups, including defenders. And we won the lawsuit just last month, which means the federal protections are back again on the western 2/3 of our state. Under state ESA, wolves have been delisted since 2015 across the state. So the only guiding policy document we have at a state level is the Oregon Wolf Conservation and Management Plan, or the Wolf Plan. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But the role that plan plays in, amongst many other things, is the fact that it determines when ODF&W can engage in killing of wolves in response to depredation. If you look at mortalities in the recent past, you will see that most of the deaths we have witnessed have been human caused, and more so by poaching. So poaching has increasingly become a significant problem for wolf recovery in Oregon. And last year, we also saw 8 wolves being killed by ODF&W in response to depredation. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. So let's look at where the packs are and where generally wolves are in our state. If you look at the map on the left, you will see that most of our wolf packs are concentrated in the northeastern corner of our state. If you compare that map to the map on the right, and bear with me here, this one is a little bit wonky. So the blue dotted line is the federal boundary of ESA listing. West of that line, wolves have federal ESA protection. East of that line, they don't. So most of our packs actually don't have federal protections. And then the red line is actually the management boundary defined by the Oregon Wolf Plan into East Management Zone and West Management Zone. And ODF&W assesses each zone for a phase of recovery. And we'll go into that a little bit. But this map is relevant for that reason. So when we talk about coexistence with wolves, there are several themes or issues we need to deal with. So I'll touch upon 3 of those. The first one being habitat connectivity. That is the ability of wildlife to travel across long distances, whether it's in search of food, in search of new mates, territory, escaping harsh weather conditions. There are several reasons. However, it's often human development that prevents wildlife from being able to travel those distances. Wolves, for example, if you look at wolf mortality data, we lost 4 wolves and we had only 156 wolves at that time to highway collisions. So that's a huge number for such a small population. In addition to that, if you look at the map on the bottom, the blue line marks the travel journey of OR 93, a wolf from Eastern Oregon, who traveled all the way to California, followed by OR 103, who traveled from the west side of our state all the way to California as well. So Oregon's wolves are critical to the recovery of wolf population in California, but without connectivity, that's going to be really challenging for them. They had to cross very serious highways and prevent or escape collisions to make it there. Oregon is seriously lacking behind when we look at crossings or connectivity structures. For example, we have only 5. When you compare that to Colorado or California, it's very, very small. And in addition to the fact that there is a threat to human safety and wildlife safety, highway collisions with wildlife is also very, very expensive. So I wanted to share a small but significant progress we made as recent as last month during our legislative session, and I was involved in this bill, which allocates $7 million of state funds to build wildlife connectivity structures in our state. This is the first time Oregon has invested its own money towards wildlife connectivity structures. It passed with bipartisan support at the legislature. And what this money will also do for Oregon is that it will make the state competitive in accessing the funds that's in the federal IIJA Act, which is the Investment and Infrastructure and Jobs Act, where $350 million has been allocated for wildlife crossings. But to access that money, the states have to put up a certain amount as match. And so the $7 million will help Oregon meet that match. I also wanted to talk about the other issues that we face with regards to promoting coexistence with carnivores and with wolves. And I'm sorry about the graphic image there, but that is reality, is poaching. Poaching is a response to the lack of coexistence, actually. And poaching generally refers to illegal killing or harvest of wildlife or its parts. Poaching in case of wolves, as I mentioned, has been significantly increasing. Last year, we lost 10 wolves. We have only 173 wolves and we lost 10 to poaching. If you look at the graph on the left from 2012 to 2018, on an average, we tend to lose between 3,000 to over 10,000 individuals of many species to poaching. So it is a serious problem in Oregon. And the motivations for poaching can be very diverse. Some poach for economic reasons, such as illegal wildlife trade, selling to pet stores, somebody not wanting to buy a hunting tag or a license. And then you have spree killings, people who kill for the thrill of killing. And we have unfortunately seen an increase in that in Oregon. And then of course, there's a deep-seated resentment towards certain species. So we see that in case of carnivores a lot, including wolves. The most recent example being the 8 wolves that were poisoned in Oregon last year in Union County. And that included a full pack wipeout. The Catherine Creek pack was completely killed by poisoning last year. So what do we do about addressing poaching? Addressing poaching would mean addressing 3 of its prongs. One is the awareness and outreach prong, that is getting people to know what qualifies as poaching and how to report on it. Monitoring and enforcement, strengthening Oregon State Police's presence on the ground. And then also making prosecution an effective deterrent. So all 3 are really important. And so I wanted to talk about some of the progress we've made there. In 2019, the legislature funded the Stop Poaching campaign. It was the first time we recognized as a state that poaching is a problem and that it needs addressing. It basically funds an outreach and awareness campaign through ODF&W. There is funding for additional staff personnel at OSP. And there is also funding for a dedicated anti-poaching prosecutor at DOJ, who recently came on board. In addition to that, we also changed some laws. The first one being regarding the penalties and fines with poaching. We changed the penalty from misdemeanor to a Class C felony under certain circumstances and for some species. We also increased the penalty fine amount and imprisonment time. And then we also passed a really important act, which was to protect sensitive wildlife location data, something that Tiana was also referring to in her presentation. This protects location data such as radio caller frequencies, denning sites, nesting sites from the public records request process. And then in 2020, because of pandemic-related budget cuts, we lost funding for DOJ's Environment and Cultural Crimes Enforcement Unit, which is the only unit that tries all environment-related crimes, including poaching. So we introduced a bill last year to restore that funding, and we're successful in doing so. So these are some of the progress we've made in addressing some of the coexistence issues in our state with carnivores. But really, when it comes down to talking about carnivores and coexistence, we often think about carnivore and livestock conflicts. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. As you remember in that map that I brought up with the boundaries and the zones, the red line, as I mentioned, is the management zone boundary for Oregon, defined by the Oregon Wolf Plan. And each zone is assessed for a phase of recovery. So phase 1 applies until a minimum of 4 breeding pairs is reached for 3 consecutive years in that region. Phase 2 is kind of like an intermediate between phase 1 and phase 3. And phase 3 kicks in when we have reached at least 7 breeding pairs for 3 consecutive years. So the west part of our state is in phase 1, and east of the red line is in phase 3. Phase 1 doesn't really apply right now because we have federal ESA protections there now. But the phase 3 is significant because each of these phases also determines what the chronic depredation standard is. That's the standard when it's reached, ODF&W can engage in killing wolves in response to depredation. So in case of phase 1, that's 4 instances in 6 months. But in phase 3, that's 2 instances in 6 months. That's really, really low and poor standard, and one that we are trying to change because 2 instances of anything in 6 months if you have a cold twice in 9 months, you will not say you suffer from chronic cold. So that's how poor the standard is. Additionally, proactive non-lethal deterrence tools are recommended, but they're not required for a landowner if there is known wolf activity in that area. However, non-lethal tools are required before lethal control can be engaged by ODFNW. So how does this play out on the ground? I'll use the most recent example we have from last year, probably the most horrific one as well, with the Lookout Mountain Pack. The Lookout Mountain Pack is in Baker County, so like easternmost county in Oregon. On that map, it's actually the bottommost dot on the right-hand side. And the Lookout Mountain Pack last spring started with 11 members in the pack, and they were very successful in producing a very big litter. They had 7 pups last year, which is why they were 11 in number. And then, unfortunately, from spring until summer, they engaged in depredations repeatedly, because of which ODFNW also repeatedly issued lethal control permits against that pack. And these lethal control permits came incrementally. So ODFNW engaged in killing 2 individuals, then 3, then 2 more. So at the end of the year, they had killed 8 wolves in this pack. So at the end of the year, we were left with only 3 wolves, the breeder female, a pup, and 1 of the yearlings. So we lost almost all of the pups last year. And even though ODFNW killed these in response to depredation to prevent them, we saw that it only stopped the depredation for a short amount of time, and then the depredations continued. So this pack is an example of how lethal control is not a long-term solution. Additionally, ODFNW and our wolf plan does not factor in climate change impact on carnivores and their behavior change because of that. In this pack's case, they face extreme drought and high summer temperatures. But if you're familiar with Baker County area, it's high and dry. So they didn't have a higher, cooler ground to go to. So they continue to stay closer to their water source, which also shared with livestock. And while their natural prey, such as elk and deer, continued to move away, which is also probably why the depredations continued. But that did not change how ODFNW interacted with wolves in this particular situation. So this is one example. We have several of such cases over the years, unfortunately. And I wanted to conclude with the fact that for the path forward for wolves or carnivores in general, as we saw in case of the Lookout Mountain Pack, traditional standards and responses to carnivore livestock conflicts, such as lethal control, is not effective, especially when they do not factor in climate change impacts on the carnivore itself. Defender strongly promotes non-lethal tools and techniques. The images below are examples of different non-lethals that we support landowners with, such as range riding, flaggery, livestock guardian dog, getting rid of bone piles and carcasses, alarm devices. All of those are proactive tools that landowners can use to mitigate conflict, but it is difficult to mitigate conflict once it's started. It's far easier and effective once you do it more proactively before you face any conflict. And finally, we need a revision of the wolf plan to look at those standards again. The wolf plan is revised every 5 years. Our next iteration is coming up in 2024. So we'll probably start the revision process sometime next year in our state. And we hope that the wolf plan can build in some contingency strategies when it comes to carnivore livestock conflicts, especially as it relates to climate change impacts on carnivores like wolves and how they react because of that. So with that, I will end my part of the presentation here. Please feel free to write to me. This is my email address, and I'll also be happy to take any questions after. Thank you.
That was so interesting to hear. Thank you so much for the pictures, presentation. I mean, personally, for me, it's really encouraging seeing somebody else of Indian descent with such a passion for wildlife. I know the work is really intense, it's complex, and yeah, there's graphic parts, and that's really important to getting a comprehensive view of the issue. So I know I really appreciate it. I know that our participants also really appreciate it. So thank you so much, Dr. Kamal, for sharing your experiences with us. With that, I'm going to switch it over to Bob Sallinger, who I think just put up his presentation. Not sure, Dr. Sallinger, if you have your video camera on or not. While you're kind of getting set up, I'll just go ahead and do your introduction. Bob Sallinger has worked for Portland Audubon since 1992. His current responsibilities include directing Portland Audubon's conservation policy initiatives, wildlife research initiatives, backyard habitat certification program, and wildlife care center. Bob has a BA in biology from Reed College and a JD from Lewis and Clark Law School. He currently serves as the board president of Humane Oregon Voters, the Intertwine Alliance, and the local Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District. He previously worked as an adjunct professor of law at Lewis and Clark Law School, where he co-taught a course called Urban Legal Ecology as an elected director at East Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District. He lives in Northeast Portland with his wife, Elizabeth Mealy, 3 children, and an assortment of pets such as dogs, goats, chicken, cat, and other animals. Super excited to hear you speak, Bob. I'll go ahead and let you take it from here.
Great. Good morning. It's great to be here with you today, and also with Tiana and Sristi. Really appreciate the opportunity. I was asked to talk about coexisting with urban wildlife, which is a huge topic, but I'll try to give you a whirlwind tour of some thoughts on this issue. So I think when we think of urban wildlife, too often we think of it as kind of an oxymoron. I've been doing work on urban wildlife issues for about 30 years. And in fact, one of the big inspirations for me was coming to an animal law conference at Lewis and Clark during the 1990s and hearing Dr. John Hadidian of the Humane Society of the United States speak about urban wildlife. He just published his book, Living with Urban Wildlife, which at the time was really a radical text. It was kind of the beginning of really thinking about what does it mean to live on an urban landscape with wildlife. And I think 30 years later, we still have a long way to go. We tend to think of wildlife as something that's out there beyond our urban landscape. This is a picture of a northern spotted owl. The wildlife is something that's out there, not really our responsibility when we think about urban landscapes. And too often, we treat it with indifference, as an anomaly, as an annoyance, as a threat. And again, as somebody else's responsibility. Urban landscapes are for people, rural and wild landscapes are for wildlife. That is far from correct. Really, we have incredible wildlife on our urban landscape. And I took this picture a couple of weeks ago. It's of my daughter. We were out hiking on Sauvie Island, which is just at the edge of Portland. There's a wildlife refuge out there. And we were hiking in the fog. I was with 2 of my kids, and we were hiking in the fog. It was a very foggy day. And we could hear birds moving overhead, but we could not see them. And suddenly the fog lifted slightly, and we were enveloped in this incredible cloud of snow geese and tundra swans and sandhill cranes that were flying overhead. And I think of this picture as a bit of a metaphor that we need to open our eyes and realize that we are surrounded by these amazing creatures. And not only from a biological and ecological perspective, but also from an ethical and moral perspective, we have a responsibility to find ways to coexist and to allow these fellow travelers on our urban landscape to flourish. And so that hasn't been our history. We have developed our urban areas often in biological hotspots. In the case of Portland, in the confluence of 2 rivers. And that picture I just showed you, that's what much of our landscape would have looked like 150 years ago. That's the kind of diversity and population levels that we would have seen on this landscape. Most of it was wetlands in Portland, but we have filled our wetlands and destroyed them, covered our rivers over, paved over our landscape, hardened and steepened our river banks, dredged our rivers. And this is just a picture of Portland. The red streams are all streams that are now underground. Those would have been fertile floodplain habitat, river confluence habitat. And so we must learn to develop our cities in ways that recognize that they are part of nature. And I put a quote on the left from Anne Whiston Spurn from the Granite Garden, who is one of the early thinkers about this as well. We need to start thinking about how do we design our cities differently. How do we get our agencies, our laws, our communities to recognize this responsibility? Because none of those things really are set up to do that right now. We've really developed our cities kind of as blast zones. This is a picture of Portland, and in the top you can see Mount St. Helens. And when Mount St. Helens erupted, they thought the entire area was destroyed in terms of biodiversity and in terms of plants. What they found actually was that there were small pockets, small islands of vegetation that eventually grew together and connected with a bigger landscape. I think of our urban landscapes as well. They're kind of blast zones, but they have pockets of habitat, and they still have wildlife populations that move through them and use them and need them. And how do we start to redo our urban landscapes, rethink them over time in a way that allows those pockets of habitat to reconnect, connect to the bigger landscape, and provide a flourishing landscape for people and wildlife? And we do have amazing wildlife populations here. Just a few examples. We have salmon. Every salmon that uses the Willamette River system has to go through downtown Portland. The Willamette River flows north to south 187 miles. And every salmon that uses that system passes through downtown Portland. We have imperiled painted turtles in Portland, some of the biggest populations in the state. The bird on the right is on the top is the rufous hummingbird, a migrant that passes through our backyards. And the one in the middle is a streaked horned lark, an endangered species that tends to nest around Portland's airport. We have peregrine falcons in downtown Portland, a formerly listed species. I've been working on peregrines for about 30 years. And when they first showed up in Portland, they were critically endangered. The response to the agencies at that time was, let's get them out of Portland. Let's take their nests, their young and their eggs, and move them to a safer place. We fought against that because we wanted to recognize that urbanites have responsibilities as well, and we need to make our landscapes a bit habitable for these species. Today, one of our bridges, Fremont Bridge, where peregrines nest, is the most prolific nest site in the state of Oregon. It's produced more young than any other nest site. So urban landscapes really can make a big difference. But it's not just about imperiled species either. This is a picture of our downtown crow roost. If you haven't been downtown in the wintertime to watch the crows come in the evening, it's amazing. About 17,000 of them roost on the waterfront. And it's a common species, but it's an incredibly interesting species. And they come in every evening and they fill the trees on the waterfront. And that just gives you a sense of how many birds are moving through our sky at one time as they do this. Some of the first responses by the community were to poison them. People were bothered by the fecal matter. There were some big poisoning events, literally poisoned crows raining down from the skies. Today, we come up with much more humane and effective strategies for managing the challenges, but also protecting these crows. Another really cool thing to see in Portland, if you haven't been there, is the Chapman School chimney in Northwest Portland, largest most swift roost in the entire world. Upwards of 15,000 swifts, when they migrate north to south, roost in that chimney every evening for a couple of weeks in September. They go in there and they use that because we don't have old growth hollow trees around anymore. And so they substituted the chimney for that. So again, some really important populations, but also just a matter of ethics. We need to find a way to coexist with these animals. We know that our wildlife populations are in trouble. And I think about a study that came out a couple of years ago from Cornell. We have 2.9 billion birds less than we had in 1970. And our urbanization is part of that problem. So how do we think about transforming our urban landscapes? Well, first and foremost, it is about habitat. It's about protecting the habitat we have and creating more, creating connectivity. We use acquisition, regulation, and voluntary action. But many of the structures that we have for wildland landscapes and rural landscapes don't work that well on urban landscapes. We have had a lot of success in Portland, though. Acquisition, we've passed bond measures for over $1 billion to acquire important natural areas. Regulation, we have a system of protecting primarily stream corridors that is relatively effective, and then voluntary action as well. But a lot of our laws weren't designed for urban landscapes, so we need to think about applying them differently. And I'm going to give you one example. We teamed up with Professor Dan Rolfe at Lewis and Clark, who we work with a lot, to look at The federal government's flood program. We have a federal flood insurance program that provides subsidized insurance for urban development. We sued them under the Endangered Species Act, arguing that they were harming fish. That case was settled, and it's had tremendous impacts, but it was a really outside the box way of dealing with protecting urban wildlife populations and habitat. The result of that lawsuit is that they are now incorporating the impacts to imperiled species into that program in a way that they haven't before. And one example of the outcomes from that is, this is West Taden Island, an 826-acre natural area that the Port of Portland wanted to turn into marine terminals. Really important site to some of our tribes, to our local community, and also to for conservation. When we won that lawsuit, when it was settled, the price of developing this property went up $100 to $200 million. That was the actual real ecological impact. And as a result, the port is now looking to protect it in its entirety rather than develop it. We also need to think about our developed landscape. On an urban landscape, we have many property owners, thousands and tens of thousands of them, and they all need to be involved. More than 40% of our landscape is residential building. And if they're not involved, we're not going to be successful. So how do you get people to protect and support wildlife in their backyards? We developed a backyard certification program with Columbia Land Trust. And we were asked originally, well, how much difference does one backyard make? And the answer is not very much. It's a way of connecting people to the landscape. But we took this program to scale. And while one backyard doesn't make a really big difference, maybe 8,000 does. And we now have 8,000 participants over the last 10 years. We need to think about green infrastructure, eco-roofs, trees as a way of greening up our landscape. And that's not just important for biodiversity, it's also important for equity. These are the kinds of strategies that we can use to address, for example, urban heat island and air quality. And we know that some of our most developed landscapes are also, and some of our most polluted landscapes, and some of our hottest landscapes are also some of our lowest income and most diverse landscapes. And so while we're also addressing biodiversity, we can address equity inclusion as well. We need new strategies for dealing with human wildlife conflicts. They're very different on urban landscapes. This is just one example. The agencies tend to treat wildlife conflicts as an annoyance, something that takes them away from their responsibilities. We should be looking at this as a primary part of urban wildlife management. Coyotes are a big example in Portland. We get a tremendous number of calls and concerns about them. The original response was to kill them off. If there were people who were complaining about them, hire federal trappers to come and kill them. We approached the counties several years ago, worked out a different solution. Right now, their solution is to give people my personal cell number and have them call me. The strategy is call Bob. That will work for a while, but I eventually plan to retire or die. And so we need to really think about holistic, comprehensive strategies as to how we manage urban wildlife populations, both common and rare. And by the way, in the case of coyotes, we have a lot of them. This is a really cool project we do with OSU and PSU, where we track urban coyote populations. Every single dot on that map, which covers pretty much all of Portland, is a coyote sighting. So we really do need to think about how to manage something like this species. We need to think about wildlife hazards. One big hazard in urban environments is cats. I'm really proud of a program we have here. We work with the Feral Cat Coalition. We're one of the only bird organizations in the country that really works with feral cat groups. And we're developing some really innovative strategies for both protecting cats and protecting birds to reduce these mortality levels. We need to think about things like the way we light our cities. The picture on the left is the World Trade Center Memorial. It's a very famous example. Light pollution really affects human health. It affects migration and wildlife health, and it also wastes energy. This example on the left is in New York City. It's the World Trade Center Memorial, and all of those dots are birds. They're migrating birds at night, and they're trapped in the light beams, and they used to fly around until they literally fell from the sky. They now turn those lights off every 45 minutes or so and let the birds escape. So they found a solution to keep the memorial, but also reduce harm to the birds. Portland is a relatively low-lit city, but we're getting lighter and lighter. So we need to look at things like regulations for reducing light pollution. A lot of cities are moving in this direction. We need to as well. And then one final example, and I'll close, is window strikes. Upwards of 1 billion birds a year collide with glass and die. They do not see it as a solid object. Oftentimes they think they can fly right through it, and they fly in full speed. And the numbers are astronomical. Our cities are getting glassier and glassier. And by the way, if you look closely, you might recognize this photo. This is the Lewis and Clark Law School. It was actually built to blend in with nature, but one of the side effects has been that there are a lot of bird collisions. And unfortunately, what was meant as a good thing actually is a very challenging thing for the wildlife. Some of the first work on bird strikes in Portland was actually done at Lewis and Clark by law students that recognized this as a problem and wanted to raise the issue up higher. Portland now has some of the strongest regulations in the country for requiring bird-friendly building practices to reduce these kinds of harms. And Lewis and Clark, by the way, did a really cool project, a really big pilot project to reduce the collisions that were occurring at the law school. So thank you, Lewis and Clark, for doing that. Lewis and Clark was really a pioneer in Portland on this issue. So I'm going to end here. I think I'm just about out of time, and you really appreciate being here today. I really encourage folks that are interested in wildlife and animal welfare to think about urban landscapes. It's a wide open field. There's tremendous work to be done. We need to adapt our laws and our regulations in very new and different ways to accommodate urban wildlife. It's also an area where there's tremendous opportunity for conservation-oriented people and animal welfare-oriented people to work together. It's not just about the biological and ecological aspects of protecting wildlife. It's also about our moral and ethical responsibility to live together harmoniously. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting to hear the interaction of, not just Portland, but the law school and these different species. And I know it's really important work. So thank you so much for highlighting all your work with everything. I do have a couple questions. We're running a little bit short on time, but if the panelists all want to turn their cameras on, so can I just get something to faces again? I have a question to start off actually with Tiana. The question has to do with the tribe's significance with, the condors. So the question is, does the condor's cultural significance to the tribe give it any additional legal protections, or is the legal framework the same as it is for other species? So whether they be non-endangered species with significance to the Yurok tribe, or just other species on the endangered species list?
It's a complicated question, and depending on who you ask, you're going to get different answers. Most of the protections for our culturally significant species do come from their environmental protection, so endangered species and things like that, which is actually a problem for other species which are culturally important to us and which may be endangered from our perspective, but maybe not from the federal or state perspective because they're endangered in our specific area. And so that's what that kind of last sort of legalish slide was about, was trying to leverage tribal sovereign law to establish species as cultural resources, which then have cultural resources have protection under various federal and state laws. And it's not really been tested in this case so far. I think that there are other examples of where that has worked out. For example, a tribe over in kind of the northern Midwest protected their rice fields as a spiritually and culturally significant resource and got protections for their lands there. We can do the cultural riverscape, like I talked about, which is tied to a particular area. There have been other tribes who have been against development in existing Condor country who have tried to say it is a cultural resource for these tribes. And so in this area, which they use, this area needs to be protected to protect cultural resources. And that actually got shot down because they said that their overall land use patterns were not indicative of being tied to a specific spot, and that cultural resources need to be tied to a specific spot. From the tribal perspective, I don't know that we would agree. but I'm kind of working through the legal ramifications there as to how we might make this work to add additional protection. So it's pretty complicated. Right now, there's not a super clear answer. We'd say that it should, and that there are federal and state laws that would make this applicable, but it's convincing everybody's legal teams and the courts potentially, if it gets to that, that this is a correct interpretation.
No, thank you so much for the answer. And I know if you guys want to put your emails in the chat for people to reach out, like that would be awesome. Yeah, but definitely understand kind of the complexity there. My question now is going to go to Dr. Kamal. You had mentioned that a proactive approach is best used in carnivore coexistence. What kind of actions, in addition to wildlife crossings, et cetera, can be taken to avoid human-wildlife conflicts before they occur?
Thank you, and that's a really good question. From a landowner's perspective, there are several tools, what are essentially called non-lethal deterrence tools, that landowners can engage in to prevent the interaction of carnivores and livestock in the first place. So think of livestock guardian dogs that protect the livestock. We have flaggery, which are basically strips of plastic that flutter in the wind and creates a crackling sound that's not liked by predators like wolves. We have scare devices. There's also range riding, which is people riding on horses across the range. A human presence itself is a deterrent in many ways. But ultimately it comes down to grazing practices, bringing a change in our grazing practices itself. For example, for years we have bred out the behavior where if attacked by a predator, animals or livestock would bunch up. So they would gather together, which is a difficult situation for a predator to attack. Our cattle run. They abandon their young and they run. So it is very easy for a predator to get them. So we have to bring back certain traits that are actually useful for livestock to have when they have predators on a landscape. So there are several resiliency techniques, grazing management and animal husbandry techniques that I'm happy to share. I'm also happy to share a PDF that highlights some of the tools and techniques that producers have and that Defender supports.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, and if you share that PDF, if it's a link, you can totally put that in the chat. We're running really short on time. So Bob, I'm going to ask you a question. If you can give a really quick answer to that about the FEMA action. What was the scope of the Audubon Society versus FEMA action? Was it more plan specific or more of a broader policy approach? Oh, Bob, you're muted.
Sorry, we sued FEMA basically arguing their national flood insurance program violated the Endangered Species Act. They settled, they had to consult with NOAA fisheries. That resulted in a jeopardy decision, which requires every community in Oregon with fish-bearing streams, with salmon-bearing streams, to update their flood code in order to remain eligible for national flood insurance. And why that's significant is because those codes have had to really be changed dramatically. As I said, increase the cost of developing that site from upwards of $100 million. So we're really capturing the real cost to imperiled species now with that, hopefully. But the scope is basically Oregon with fish-bearing streams.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I want to really just, thank all the panelists for coming here, giving us your inside scoop of, your day-to-day, just the work that's being done in the field. I know a lot of students don't know all the work that's always being done. So it was very enlightening. If anybody wants to reach out to see the panelists, they should have put in their emails in the chat. There will be a short break for about 15 minutes, and then our next panel will be advancing equity and animal advocacy. So grab some breakfast, coffee, etc. Show up to our next panelist. And thank you so much for really just giving us the inside scoop on your work. Really appreciate it, all three of you.
Thank you. Have a good day.